know. 5 points in the darkness make a different kind of show. They say we're better together, but what do they know when the stars align differently down here below? And maybe we'll rise when we cut all the ties. There's a flag that we fly under our own sky. Remember all the stories that your granddad told about a republic that wouldn't be controlled. Now the suits in the city say we've all been sold, but there's a fire burning that just won't get old. And maybe we'll rise when we cut all the ties. There's a flag that we fly under our own sky. They draw their lines on paper, we draw ours in the sand. Some dreams are getting closer, while some don't understand. Don't understand. The highways stretch forever toward a setting sun, where cattle graze on memories of battles won. They say unity's the answer, but maybe we're done with playing by the rules of the chosen one. Oh, maybe we'll rise when we cut all the ties. There's a flag that we fly under our own sky. And maybe we'll rise when we cut all the ties. There's a flag that we fly under our own sky. Our own sky. Our own sky.
Hey, good evening, everyone. It is that time again, right? It's time for late night coffee talk, and I'm excited to be here. We're going to do the usual shtick tonight. I'm going to answer your questions, but it's going to be a little special because the entirety of tonight, of the time that we have over the next hour, is going to be dedicated to previewing for you a very special report, right? I talked about it last week. August the 3rd, we are going to be dropping a report, an update to the 2015 report called Can Texas Make It? And before it's seen anywhere else, before it drops on the 3rd, I'm going to actually walk you through it tonight. You'll have an opportunity to ask questions still, and I will get to questions of an, I guess you would say, other than this report variety a little bit later if I have time at the tail end, but it is a bit of a weighty report. So if I don't get to questions that are, about things other than this report, excuse me, then you will forgive me because this is a big one, right? So, excuse me. Wow. I think I need more of this. They told us the Sahara dust was blowing in. And this is what that kind of feels like. Anyway, all right, let's get some business out of the way before we tear off into answering the question of all questions, right? One of the questions that we get asked the most, which is, can Texas survive without the federal government? So for those of you joining us for the first time, I'm Daniel Miller, president of the Texas Nationalist Movement, and this is Late Night Coffee Talk. This is that time where in the middle of the week, I take a break from what I'm working on and I come here, fire up this camera, and we get a chat together, right? 99% of the time, it's me just answering your questions, but sometimes I've got some things that I want to get off my chest, and that's kind of like what's happening tonight. And actually, it's not even just me getting something off my chest. It's me wanting to give you, somebody who comes here week in and week out, advance and early access to something that is going to be kind of a big deal. So there you have it. If you want to ask questions, here's what you do. First and foremost, if you are not on the Texian app, you need to go there. You need to get your account set up, right? Go to Texian.app here. Let me just do this. So much easier. There you go. You can go to Texian.app and you can, do the thing. Right? Go sign up for an account. Get on Texian. We are live streaming over there right now. And once you're over there, you will see where we are live streaming. You can ask questions, right? There's a whole chat with other people that are watching on the app. Plus, if you want to ask your question, there's a special Q&A tab over there just for your questions. So be sure to use that. Additionally, if you're watching on any of the others, right, any of the numerous YouTube channels or Facebook pages or X accounts or the one Rumble account, all you got to do is just drop your question in chat, right? So throughout this entire broadcast, if you're watching it live, drop your question in chat. Additionally, there is one other way. You'll see it down here at the bottom here in just a second, but you can email your question to coffeetalk@tnm.org. And I also want to take a minute and thank tonight's sponsor, Universal Coin and Bullion. You can visit their website at universalcoin.com. Proud founding member, partners of what we are doing here on Coffee Talk and the TNM, and lots more about that coming up soon. So let's, without any further ado, let's dive into this real quick. Let me do something and see. Let me see if there is something that I can tackle early, right before I get to this report. Yeah, okay. All right, we're going to do the report. All right, so I'm going to launch into this bad boy right now. So a little backstory, just so you guys have an understanding of where this all came from. For many, many, many years, it was drilled into the heads of pretty much every Texan, right, that we pay more into the federal system than we get back. I mean, I heard that stat all the way back in the 90s, okay? And it never kind of went away, right? There was never this indication that it had flipped. Of course, when the TNM was founded in 2005, there was a tax policy institute that had it broken down, and they had it published eventually on their website. But then when the TNM started getting lots of traction, say circa 2009, 2010, the opposers to Texas independence always come out of the woodwork, and they always say the craziest stuff, right? I mean, just this most incredible, ridiculous things. Oh, if Texas leaves a union, it's going to get invaded by Martians, or they say ridiculous things, right? And of course, one of those things that they would say is there's no way that Texas can make it without the money that it gets from the federal government. And at our core as Texans, it's always been drummed into our heads. That's, that is not the case. And so cue the pro-establishment, pro-status quo media. Uh-oh. Did I freeze? There we go. Now I unfroze. That was weird. But cue the pro-establishment, pro-status quo media who would jump on and start, with their weird Wallet Hub comes to mind as a website that they kind of drag out ever so often when Texas independence comes up in the media and says, well, Texas gets far more than it receives from the federal government. And, somebody really needs to get those people at Wallet Hub a calculator, because even their math doesn't add up. But it's not just kind of weirdo websites like Wallet Hub. I mean, you had the Rockefeller Institute come out and say virtually the same thing, that Texas is a taker. And of course, Rockefeller Institute was, their version was, I think, colored even more by their political bias, because they essentially said all the blue states are contributors in the federal system and all the red states are the takers, right? Which everybody's like, yeah, that's just fairy tales, right? It's fairy tale land. Nobody believes that crap, right? And so, 2015 comes around, right after the Scottish independence referendum in 2014, we were getting ready to head into Brexit vote territory. And, the TNM was getting a lot of media attention. And man, here it comes again. This flood of these idiots saying that Texas is this taker, right? That we're some welfare state, that we wouldn't be able to survive without the federal. What are you going to do without all that federal money? I guess you'd just dry up and blow away. You'd be a third world country in 30 seconds. You know who I'm talking about, right? I mean, you guys have all heard this kind of stuff before. So 2015 comes around and it's like, you know what? We're sick and tired of this. So let's just get down to it. Look, one way or the other, we're going to find out what the truth is, the reality. Because look, even if it was the way that they said it was, we would want to know that definitively. Not because it would dissuade us from independence, but because that means we have some additional things we need to take care of, right? It doesn't weaken our position. It just adds a couple of things that we need to consider on the road to independence, okay? So we did. And one of the things that came out immediately when we started prepping that 2015 report was that it was confirmation of something we already knew, right? That the federal government is a mess, like a total mess. We found figures. So first off, we found no single comprehensive source of the figures necessary to calculate that at the federal level at all. None at all, okay? And what we did find when you're able to go from one source to the other and try to get those reconciled is we found overlaps in the books on both revenue and expenditures. And so any calculation that we had to do then, we had to go through and meticulously filter those things out, right? I mean, you had to go find the overlaps and go, okay, these guys here are showing two different things on their books. And that was the other part too, is you would find government reports about the same thing, supposedly covering the same territory in these overlaps with information that did not agree. It's the same thing that we talk about related to the federal government, which is they have no mechanism whatsoever to really calculate the size and the scope, or to monitor the size and scope of the federal system. There is no single source agreeable list of federal agencies and federal programs. Doesn't exist. There is no single source for that sort of thing at the federal level. Not one that is comprehensive, because when they say it is, you go look and you find a federal agency or federal program that's not on that list, right? So, and those are not our findings. Those are findings from other people. Same thing with federal laws. Nobody can really accurately tell you how many federal laws, rules, and regulations are on the books. They can give you a good estimate, maybe a good estimate. So, is it any wonder that if you're talking about the monetary situation, right, the financial relationship between a state and the federal government, that the federal government's books are going to be jacked up? Of course not. So 2015, we took a balance of payments approach, right? We used the same methodology that was used by the Rockefeller Institute and Wallet Hub and a lot of these other guys. And what we found out was how they were cooking the books when they would release those statements, right? So when Rockefeller and Wallet Hub would do it, they would include Social Security, let's just broaden it, federal pension benefit payments into the mix, and then they would calculate the incomes from those, and then they would come up, and by doing that, what they were effectively able to do was put their thumb on the scale. So states that attracted a high number of retirees naturally showed more federal money coming into those states. And of course, people would say, well, if you take those things out, then, what are you saying? The retirees don't get their money? No, it's not what we're saying at all. What we're saying is that retirees that are receiving federal pension benefits are not locked into a particular residence. They don't have to live in the United States, okay? That is a well-established fact. When people say what's going to happen to my Social Security and they talk about, all that sort of thing, it's like, look, literally people live outside of the United States already and collect Social Security benefit payments, right? But federal pension benefit payments in general. So long story short, when we did that, in the period of years that we were able to measure at the time, what we found in 2015 was generally somewhere between a 103 and $160 billion overpayment into the federal system, right? So what that meant was that for every single solitary year when Texans pay in collectively into the federal system, there's about 103 to $160 billion, depending on the year, that we never see again. It doesn't come back in money, in services, in contracts, in federal jobs, payroll, nothing, right? It goes to the federal system and evaporates. More likely than not, it just gets distributed to these other states that are underwater, right? But that's what we found. And it was, I got to say, it was fun. It was a short report for math nerds. It was great, but it was nice to be able to conclusively have an answer to the question based on federal sources and not some, jackwagon blogger at Wallet Hub or, somebody with a political agenda over there at Rockefeller, right? And to be able to have it conclusively and say, this is our methodology. But there was something about that report that always bugged me. Right. And it was, there were things, because of how quickly we had to get that report out, there were things related to our financial relationship with the federal system that we were not able to take into account. Right. We just did the straight up balance of payments. Here it is. Here's the plus column. Here's the minus column. And this is where it is. Okay. But some things that we never were able to take into account, which was how much of that federal spending that ends up in Texas is actually not tax money that comes in, but actually borrowed in the name of Texas or in the name of Texans, more appropriately. What is the effect of inflation on the imbalance, right? So we have no say over monetary policy. They inflate the currency. That devalues here. How does that affect the calculations? There were just a lot of different things that we were not able to take into account, either because we ran out of time, or in most instances, the data was not available. right? I mean, I can't tell you how many times we came up with data not available. So what that led to was this report being out there and effectively being there for 10 years, kind of this nagging thing. Then we roll into December of last year, and I say, it's now time to update this report. It's more important than ever because, frankly, I think the financial relationship is such that the United States federal government is going to blow up, and it's going to take us down the tubes with it, right? So super, super important, right? I think it's more timely now than it has ever been. So that spurred this report, which will be released on August the 3rd. And now I'm going to walk you through it. But before I do that, I want to give a big thank you to CSM Mongoose for your super chat in YouTube, $99. Thank you. He says, time to text it, challenge time. So I believe CSM Mongoose is challenging you guys to step up and contribute as well. There are buttons for that, super chats on YouTube. Additionally, if you're watching on Texian, there is a donate button, and we very much appreciate those of you who throw a little jingle into the jar so we can get this out, because this is the other part. As we release this report, there's going to be a tendency on the part of the establishment to want to bury it. So it's going to be up to us to get this in the hands of Texans, right? So thank you, CSM Mongoose on YouTube. Really, really do appreciate it. All right, let's get down to it. Man, I see, guys, I see your questions about the data centers, but let me get through this and let's see what we can come up with, okay? All right, so friends, here it is. This is the new report, and you will be able to find it. We're going to send it to everybody via email, plus we have a website that's going to launch along with it. You want to be the first to know where that is. Be sure to sign up on the Texian app, and we'll make sure to get that out to you. But really and truly, what it does, and this is the approach that we had on this report, it's not about the balance of payments, right? The real question or the real objection is whether or not Texas can take care of Texas if we are outside of the union, right? And so the real question gets masked in this sort of objection about the federal government taking care of us and paying more into us than we put into the federal system. And so we decided, look, let's just, what we need to do is look at this from the standpoint of being a self-governing independent nation, and just say, look, do we have the capability and the capacity financially to take care of ourselves at the level that we're used to, right? And so that's what this report answers, right? How much does Texas actually rely on the federal government, and how would it fare on its own? So here are some of the top lines for you. It's just three figures that I want you to burn into your brain. We are the 8th largest economy on the planet. Texas is the 8th largest economy on the planet. Okay, what that means is, out of about 200 self-governing independent nation states, we are not just in the top 10, we are the 8th, right? It's a massive, massive figure. And then if we're going to do the balance of payments fund, like the people at Rockefeller and Wallet Hub do, well, now with the most conservative figures, our annual overpayment is $68 billion. Some of you are going to say, well, that's a far cry from the 103 to 160 billion. I'm going to explain why that is here in a moment. And what you're going to find is that 68 billion number in overpayment really masks more of a drain than you can anticipate. And then, of course, the thing that's looming on the horizon is this $40 trillion of federal debt that it will roll over to 40 trillion probably at the beginning of October. I'm not a prognosticator on these things, but look, that wheel's only spinning one direction, right? And that's upward and upward, and the trajectory it's on. You're looking at $40 trillion of federal debt this October. So what this report covers, I'm going to talk a bit about the methodology. We're going to talk about the honest numbers, how you read them honestly, not what Rockefeller and Wallet Hub and those guys did. We're going to talk about what Texans pay versus what our government costs. Okay. And then we're going to talk about the four things that the critics cannot argue. Talk about Texas, the declaration that Texas is a taker being an accounting illusion. And I've already talked about that a little bit, so I'm not going to really dwell on that too much. But we're going to get down to these two right here. And this is going to be super important for you. And like I said, I don't have time to go through. It's 46-page report. Okay. I ought to tell you, I think we were 12 pages on the 2015. That's where we are on this. But two things that are going to be, I think, really explosive from this report based off these numbers is what this means for young Texans, right? So if you are currently 36 years old or younger, understand that you are the largest by age demographic. Excuse me. You are the most affected by this. I don't want to say the largest by age demographic because we know the boomers are still moving through. But what is interesting about that, and I'll get to that here in a moment, is that Texas, contrary to popular belief, is one of the youngest states in the union by median age. And so we're gonna explore what this means for young Texan, and then we're going to talk about why staying is the expensive option. In other words, if we stay, what does that look like? Excuse me. So just so you know, and I want to cover this before I get to methodology, every figure has a named source, right? So when you get this report and you got somebody who wants to pick it to death and be a naysayer, understand that every figure in this report traces to a source. Here are some of those sources, right? That not the men's room at Buc-ee's, where apparently the Rockefeller people and Wallet Hub get their numbers, okay? But the U.S. Treasury, the Internal Revenue Service, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, Bureau of Economic Analysis, Social Security Administration, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, the Department of Defense. We even use the Rockefeller Institute's numbers in here as well, right? As part of the refutation of their methodology. But we got it from the FDIC, from the Texas Comptroller. So, we dug deep with computer modeling for figures that were not readily available. So all of the sources, including year-by-year tables, are in the appendices of this report. So for those of you that want to get very wonkish about this, you're going to have a hi-ho Dario. But here's the bottom line. If we're going to ask the question, can Texas make it? Could Texas be its own self-governing independent nation? Absolutely. Right. I mean, look, let's just get to the punchline right at the very beginning. Texas can pay its own way. Literally, it's not a theory, but based off of all of the numbers, all in, including the figures from DC, right, from the federal system and from the state and everything else, Texas can absolutely pay its own way. So here you go. Today's tax levels, with no state income tax and a lighter total tax burden than almost any peer on earth, Texans already raise enough to fund the full cost of governing Texas. And that doesn't mean Texas as it is as a state. That means Texas handling everything, right, as a self-governing, independent nation state, right? The finding is self-sufficiency. We're paying very close to what our government costs and then some, okay? Now, is it a windfall? No, it's not. But look, let's be honest, $68 billion a year is nothing to sneeze at. And like I said, we will see here in just a moment where, as we get through this, why that 68 billion annual number is still really understated, okay? So we know this. We talked about this just a moment ago. The Texas is a takers and accounting illusion. It costs. So when they do that, it counts money that Washington borrowed. So, AKA, they go put debt. Texans own Social Security checks coming home. They treat those as gifts, right? In other words, like the federal government borrowing money and sending it here is doing something, or federal pension benefit recipients who paid into a system getting the checks they were promised, they treat that as some gift, and we know that that's not. If you treat borrowed money as the deferred tax it is, then Texas sends Washington about $68 billion a year more than it gets back. That's the third largest net contribution of any state. And I want you to key in on this. Borrowed money, right here, borrowed money as deferred tax, okay? And this is why the report did not quite hit the mark back in 2011. Because when you think about it, it doesn't matter how much the federal government sends to Texas, right? If they're borrowing that money, whose name are they borrowing it in? Well, they're borrowing it in the name of everybody who is here now and who is to come after us, our children and their children, and at some point it has to be paid. So it is essentially a tax that has been deferred. The more they borrow, the more they put in, the more the tax will be down the road. And so through their shady accounting tricks, they can say, well, we pumped in, $1.50 for every dollar of tax you paid in, but ultimately who's on the hook for that additional 50 cents? Well, it's us and it's future generations, because they will ultimately have to be taxed to pay for it. Okay. So super important. Staying as the expensive option, Texans co-sign about $150 billion a year in new federal debt. And so that's breaking out the portion that would be held, that's held by Texas as it stands right now. And we get into the calculations in a bit. 72 to $80 billion of that money that we're pumping in is pure interest on that debt. And we have to remember, the federal government admitted, by its own auditors, admitted that it loses hundreds of billions a year to improper payments and fraud, and it has never passed a financial audit. Okay. So here's the quote that some of you saw on social media. Washington is in the terminal stage of a Ponzi scheme, and its auditors say so in writing. Okay. It's the absolute truth. It's a Ponzi scheme. The only way the financial system currently continues, or will continue in the future, is for new payers and new money to come into the bottom to cover the debt that they've done. We've talked about this previously, that the debt we've been warned we would owe on the way out, is an opening demand. It's not a bill. We are not locked in to paying any portion of the federal debt as an exit tax, right? There is no responsibility or ironclad liability on that. And then again, Texans keep their Social Security, but as we will see when we get in here, really the problem with seniors receiving Social Security is not Texas withdrawing from the union, right? That's not the hurdle. The hurdle is 2030, 2031, 2032, when the projection for Social Security money, the fund that pays out Social Security, the projection is for it to go insolvent, for benefits to have to be cut substantially, right? So independence is not the threat to Social Security. Staying in the union is the threat to Social Security payments. The only way seniors will even get a shot after 2030 and 2031 of getting their full bump benefits is if Texas becomes an independent nation and all of our money stays here, right? I mean, that's the only shot, okay? So going through this is not forecaster model. We've talked about that. And this is just a recap of everything that was up top, right? So let's get into the methodology. I've already talked about this a bit, so I won't dwell on it, but essentially the difference between balance of payments, right? In other words, did more federal money flow into Texas in a year than Texans paid in federal tax? Where the real debate, the real question is actually one of fiscal capacity, right? Which is the question we should be asking moving toward independence. If Texans, taxed as they are now, could pay for the government in an independent Texas that we would actually need and that we are accustomed to, okay? So That's the real question that we need to be asking and answering, and that's what it does in this report. The window that we use for this this is to the methodology. We did the 6 most recent fiscal years with complete data, right? So we only able to obtain complete data from 2019 through 2024, and we averaged them, okay? We did that so nobody could accuse us of cherry picking years where it was in our favor. I mean, we did this as adversarial to our position as we possibly could. Look, I would love to generate a report that says we pay, $500 billion a year more than we get back. I would love to do that, but it would be factually incorrect. But more than that, we wanted to make sure that this report was as adversarial toward our position as it possibly could be, right? We sided in favor of the opposition in this report every chance we got with conservative counts, right? Just to make sure that it was ironclad and airtight. Now, one thing, if you'll notice between those dates, 2019 through 2024, anybody remember what happened in those dates, in between those years? If you say the C word that we're apparently not allowed to say, even though the chief apostle and prophet of it, has been dragged in front of Congress and disgraced. But you know what I'm talking about. So what does that mean? Well, think about the relief funds that came about, where they basically just printed more money and sent everybody checks, right? So we're accounting for that. So just the fact that we don't even go in and pull those numbers out, we leave them in, ought to tell you something, right? Is that we're wanting this to be as above board as possible. So when it gets to the methodology, we applied the carve-out rule symmetrically, which means that, defense agencies, grants, Medicaid, contracts, veterans, all that sort of stuff, if it was carved out, it was applied symmetrically. So Social Security, federal pension benefit payments were in that class, and I explained that a moment ago, right? No double counting. Any federal grants that pass through the state budget were only counted once, right? So none of that sort of stuff. The sourcing. So here's the little caveat. This is a snapshot, not a forecast. It measures today's tax flows against today's cost of government, and it sets no prediction about a post-independence economy. That is a key thing, because what we're doing is showing fiscal capacity for the way things sort of are right now. If Texas were a self-governing independent nation state, and we needed defense and we needed all those things that are quote unquote provided as a benefit of our membership in the union, if we had to provide those for ourselves, what does that look like, right? So it's a snapshot in time, but it's not a forecast. And we say that because as Texans, when you finally have a full say in your government, you may want to change how things are structured. You may not want to have a program that the federal government does here, or you may decide you want 2 of them. I mean, who knows? Ultimately, it's up to you, right? But the fact is that we can't predict what you are going to do. We can say we suspect, right? I've got a pretty good idea of what y'all want, what you don't want. But the fact is that it's a snapshot for right now. It's not a prognostication. We're not pushing a particular policy position moving forward, because that's not the job of this particular report. All right. And then here's the other thing. Before this was released, and guys on the leadership team know this, is that we had a draft of this a couple of months ago, a little bit more, and then we threw it in front of hostile reviewers, right? Economist, fact checker, lawyer, go down the list, butcher, baker, candlestick maker, adversaries. We wanted them to poke holes in it. And then whatever came back with the holes, we went through, researched, fixed, etc., before releasing the final report. So there you go. There's the methodology. Real quick, let me take a look here. Oh, CSM Mongoose, before I get going, another $99.99. He says, this is from Debbie. We are still in the fight for Texas. Manny, we love both you and Debbie. Thank you very much for this. And it's very much appreciated. And if you guys would like to accept his challenge, you can do that with Super Chat on YouTube or the donation button on the actual Texian live stream. So thank you to both of you. All right. So I've talked about this. I'm not going to dwell on this too much, but we talked about the balance of payments. When you talk about the balance of payments, the reason that those other guys put their thumb on the scale, or we refer to it as that, is Social Security checks dominate balance of payments, right? So this is why you would see things like them coming out and saying, well, the red states get more money than the blue states do. The blue states are only putting in. And it's because most of the places where retirees are going are red states. I mean, Texas in-migration is absolutely crazy during the last census. And a lot of that is people that are retiring here. So you wind up with a bunch of Social Security receiving retirees that move here, or Florida or other places, where the climate's warm. And so what do you see? You see red states get massive quantities of these Social Security checks. And so, again, probably one of the reasons it's the most asked question that we have gotten about Social Security, but it also shows you how they are cooking the books on the Social Security payments. Because as I said and have said over and over and over, your Social Security is residence independent. I mean, don't move to places that are state sponsors of terror and you continue to receive it anywhere on the planet. That's just the reality of it. So, same kind of situation. So over a year, did more money. So that's the balance of payments. And then the fiscal capacity, we talked about that and why those two are very different, but really get conflated all the time. When we're talking about what belongs on the cost side, this is this right here. This is what I said a moment ago. Social Security, Medicare, veterans cash benefits, federal pensions are not the cost of running a government in Texas. They are obligations the federal government owes to the individuals who paid in, and they are portable. A retiree Social Security check follows her to Florida. It would follow her to Portugal. None of it was ever conditional on Texas staying in the Union any more than a Texan's private pension is conditional on which state he or she retires to. It's the reality. It's what we've said all along. So when they do these balance of payments, when they use that as the methodology, it's intentional to cook the books. They know they're doing it, right? It's an improper methodology for the question that's being asked. And they know that because they want to manufacture an outcome, and so that's how they approach it. So they cook the books, they move the numbers around, they don't include certain things they should, they include other things they shouldn't to get the number that they want. And so, here we go. When the usual balance payment studies file all of that under federal spending in Texas, they load roughly $177 billion a year of individual benefits onto a ledger that is supposed to measure the cost of operating a government. Okay? So it's important, there's certain things that we'll talk about, defense, federal agencies, but I just want you to hone in on that one. The rule that we apply throughout, the cost side keeps everything in independent Texas would generally run and pay for. Defense, federal agency payroll and operations, grants, and it says federal agency payroll and operations. I want you to understand those are governmental functions, right? Again, the snapshot, not a projection of the future. Grants, okay? Federal contracts, veterans hospitals, the entire existing Texas state budget. Basically, all the things, all of the costs incurred by having a government at, what would be the equivalent of a nation-state government. Now, here's something that's you got to know, and I'm not going to go through this line by line, much like the rest of this report, but this is something that I want you to. It's buried if I don't bring it up. It doesn't have a big bearing, but I just want you to know it because I want you to think about this the next time somebody comes at you with this nonsense. The federal government can no longer tell you in one honest accounting how much of its spending actually lands in Texas. Okay? It's kind of interesting, especially when you start looking at the dates. It used to. For decades, the Census Bureau published the Consolidated Federal Funds Report, federal spending broken out by state and county, alongside an annual federal aid to states report. Washington killed both when? In 2012. Well, that seems interesting because some of you may remember that when I talked about this earlier, I talked about how this thing kept cropping up over and over. And I mentioned 2014 is when we did, when we started the report. 2015 was when we released it. But remember that all of this stuff started coming up. I mentioned the dates earlier, 2009, 2010. 2012 was a pretty big year. I seem to remember being on Hannity in 2012. And why was that? Because this very thing was back in the news. And, we were going with the narrative that we had always known, which was Texas receives more from the federal government than it gets. And, at the time there was no report, but things were being cited. But understand that in 2012, Washington, D.C. stopped those two reports, the Consolidated Federal Funds Report, which was, again, the state breakdowns, and the federal aid to states report, both gone. Why in 2012? Things that make you go, Additionally, look at this. Medicare spending by state of residence has not been published since 2020, right? That's the largest health program in the United States. Same fate. The information goes away. They don't break out payroll taxes by state at all, right? So you don't know. I mean, you can figure it out. You can guess, right? You can calculate. You can maybe pull some figures here and there, but they never produce a report say, hey, these payroll taxes you're paying, this is how much is coming in from Texas. This is how much is coming in from Louisiana. This is how much is coming in from California. They don't do that, right? And then, I mean, look, military retirement pay by state runs 2 years plus behind. So it's 2026, and we still don't even have the 2023 and 2024 figures. So, look, even the IRS's own collections by state table carries a printed disclaimer that it shows where taxes are filed, not where the burden falls, right? So we had to stitch together a dozen sources to construct, which something that we should be able to get in one place. But these guys can't maintain their books, right? So anyway, let's get down to the brass tacks. Here's what Texans pay. We pay two governments. We pay the government in Washington, the government in Austin. And here's the 6-year average. Federal taxes paid by Texans, which is the IRS gross collections. This is an average for 2019 to 2024. We're paying $351.9 billion to the feds. And then here in Texas, the state taxes and the fees, excluding the federal funds, we're paying $101.7 billion. And we had to exclude the federal funds because we don't count them twice, right? So our total spend by Texans for government, so like the entire package, everything we get from the feds, everything we get from the state, is $453.5 billion a year, right? That is the average across those 6 years. And then and you guys can see this when you get the report, but here are the breakdowns where it comes from: individual income taxes, withheld, FICA reported together, taxes not withheld plus self-employment tax, corporate income tax, goes on and on, right? So here's the bottom line. Texas is 8.2% of federal taxes by the IRS's own where filed collection, right? And 8.2% again by residence-based measure that is used by USA Facts. So we have, even though the IRS has the disclaimer on the number, we actually have a secondary source that sort of all converge on this 8.2%. So all federal taxes coming in, 8.2% of them, it's Texas. So, I guess congratulations. I mean, I don't know. I don't think congratulations. But, you look at this, and the burden keeps climbing. The fiscal year 2025 data book published since puts Texas at $479.5 billion, up almost 15% in a single year. So as Texas continues to prosper and swim against the current of the rest of the states and the federal economy, as Texas continues to thrive and explode, what does that do? That means that we are responsible for a higher percentage of the money that is going into the federal side. So if ours is going up, what does that tell you? Well, it tells you that, yet again, we are pulling more than our weight inside the union. Okay. So we'll go through that. That is some again, some of the methodology there, but it gets into the numbers and it breaks them down for you. So here's what it costs. And this is fun. So if you start with the broadest possible measure of federal spending in Texas, and this is where I said, look, we did the Rockefeller Institute, right? We did these guys, which, their faulty balance of payments method. Then you take out the portable individual benefits. Here it is with their sources, right? So Social Security benefits to Texans, $82.3 billion. I know 4 years ago, I think we were somewhere in the neighborhood of about 72 to 75 billion annually is where that number was. Medicare all parts, 65.9, it's almost 66 billion. Veterans cash benefits, a little over 15 billion. Federal, civilian, and military pensions paid to Texans, about a little under 13.5 billion, right? So you got to pull all those out because they are, again, residence independent, 176.9 billion. Then you've got this one-time relief, which averaged out to about $50.7 billion a year across the window, almost all of it in 2020 and 2021, because you can't count emergency stimulus as the permanent cost of government. It's just not real. So here, when you take out the fudge factors that they love to keep in, here's what it boils down to. Total federal spending in Texas, the $431.4 billion, less the portable individual entitlements, that takes $176.9 billion out. You take the COVID relief out of $50.7 billion. The federal cost of governing Texas, which is $203.8 billion, state-funded spending $91.5 billion, and what do you got? The total cost of government in Texas is $295.3 billion a year. That's it. That's the total cost. Okay. So what is that, right? In other words, what do you include in that cost of government? Well, defense. Right? That's got to be a big part of it. You look at the payroll of about 155,000 federal civilians who work in Texas. Again, this is a snapshot, not a prognostication. Federal contracts beyond defense, assistance programs. As it stands right now, we're looking at parity, right? We're looking at the way things are right now. If they stayed exactly the way that they are right after independence, could we fund it all? And the answer is yes. Question becomes after that, do we want to? And you only get to answer that question after independence. Okay. Here's another one too. A fair share of that state spending line is not Texas free choice. About a fifth of what Texas spends from its own funds, so on the order of about $20 billion a year, okay, let this burn in your brain, goes to programs Washington, D.C. mandates and only partly funds. Medicaid most of all, right? So we counted every dollar of it as a cost because we're doing this in the most conservative way possible, leaning toward, the opposer's viewpoint. But understand, we looked at that, took that into account, decided to leave it in, just so they would, I guess, maybe have a fighting chance or whatever. But understand this, when we get ready to go into a legislative session, they start passing the budgets. When they start working on the biennial budget, somewhere in the ballpark of about a fifth of what Texas will outlay is going to go to programs that are mandated by D.C. that D.C. only partially funds. That the only way to get any of our tax money back on that is for Texas to implement the program and then pony up either the 40 or the 60% match So we're basically being taxed for the same program twice, but that's a whole other conversation. So you'll get that. Here's where the gap is, and here's the chart that breaks it down. Obviously, 2020, 2021 were the two closest because of the COVID stimulus, but we're paying, like right here, this 2024 spread, $540 billion we paid in, and the cost of our government was $359 billion, right? So, do the math on that one. That's just in 1 year. And you start adding these gaps together, and what you're going to see is the COVID relief years kind of blew the curve, because were it not from that, we would be kind of in that same ballpark of where we were on the low end, the 103 billion or so overpayment. But that's a whole other conversation. Okay, let me get through this because it's almost been the hour. So let me just get down to some of the other parts, right? So we have the things that they can't argue away. Texas is already the size of a nation state. Very clear. I think we already know that with the 8th largest economy. Additionally, let's go down here. We already pay our own way, right? The fact of the matter is Texas is putting more in than we get out. And so we're paying our own way as a nation state would. We just are not receiving the benefits of being a self-governing independent nation. Scrolling down, this is going to be super key, right? The debt Washington bleeds from Texas now, and how much we would owe on the way out. Now, some of you have probably heard me talk about this before, is we are not on the hook for a single dime of that federal debt, right? Once we become independent. Once we're still in, we kind of are, right? As individuals, as being part of the club. But as you get down here, the bill, the interest that we are paying on the debt is pretty extraordinary, right? So 2019, Texans were paying about $31 billion annually onto the interest on the federal debt. In 2024, it doubled now, and then 2025, it's about $80 billion. That's pure interest on Washington, D.C.'s past borrowing. Okay, so literally, as we continue to throw money at Washington, D.C., it's going, the $80 billion of what we throw at them is not even going to do anything for us. It's going to pay the interest on the debt for things that they borrow that may or may not benefit Texas in any shape, form, or fashion. And there's breakdowns in this report over it. And I mean, these numbers are just absolutely staggering. I mean, just incredible. The debt is probably the scariest thing, right, out of this entire report. Let me find, we could talk about this, but I'm looking for this one particular takeaway that I want you guys to get. Here you go. Is the federal government sound? Right. This is part of the question, a question that was not asked but was answered. Right. Its own managers have answered in writing. Every year, the Treasury publishes an audited financial report of the United States government, and for years now, it has carried a section under a heading that is not ours but theirs. And here it is: an unsustainable fiscal path. The fiscal year 2025 edition states it flatly that current policy is unsustainable because spending and revenue are structurally out of balance, and the GAO, which audits the books, calls for urgent and sustained action to change course. Okay, so, they're essentially confessing the fact that this thing, I mean, to quote my dear departed father, this thing's going to fall like a turd from a tall horse. I mean, that's just, and look, that's not us being doomsayers out here, going, the sky's falling. I mean, this is literally their own people saying this year after year after year. And it's like, look, the credit agencies, right? The World Standard & Poor's, Fitch, Moody's, they all have dropped the credit rating of the United States because they think that the horse might be a Shetland pony and not a Clydesdale, and that the turd don't have far to fall, right? So the fact is, I mean, strip the seal off the Treasury building, and that is the mechanic of a Ponzi scheme. The stage where the whole thing runs only as long as fresh lenders keep arriving. Okay, but here's the thing, and this is going to be the takeaway before I get to the last couple of things. But printing dollars to cover a debt is not an escape from default. It is a default wearing a different coat, the one the Penn-Wharton budget model names, when it puts the end game at default explicitly or implicitly. So essentially it says this thing's toast, right? Because debt monetization is going to produce significant inflation. And when you start looking at it, I mean, there's a whole section in here that deals with the part of about inflation. But here's this: staying is not the safe choice. It's not. It hasn't been. And we've tried to shout it from the mountaintops that Texas must become a self-governing independent nation or suffer the fate that has been locked in by the federal system. Staying is not the safe choice. You want to stay tethered to it and, be like, hell or high water, I won't go. Okay, I get that, but understand what you're walking into. You're condemning your children and grandchildren to fiscal child abuse. You're willing to throw them into a wood chipper of the federal government's own making. That's the reality. Understand what you're siding with. Okay? Staying is standing under a roof its own inspectors have condemned, betting it holds one more year. This sounds sort of familiar. What are you waiting for? Right? There is an urgency to this. How many times have we said it? There is an urgency. Okay. Let me get to a couple of more things. This is where Texas talks about the federal debt, how much exit debt Texas would have or would not have, all sourced, all backed up. Here's the hidden inflation tax I want to touch on just really quickly. Remember, we didn't vote on inflation. I mean, we as Texans didn't, but the people that we sent there that continue to perpetuate this system surely did on our behalf. And in 2022, the inflation tax was effectively a drain of about $150 billion out of our bank accounts, right? Out of bank deposits. That's more, just so you understand, federal government inflation was in excess of what Texas collects from every state tax every single year. So every Texas state tax, every dime they collect a year on average, $101.7 billion. The $150 billion that was zapped in 2022 was more than that, almost 50% more, right? The dollar has lost about 97% of its purchasing power since the Federal Reserve opened its doors in 1913. About 88% since Nixon cut the last out of gold in 71, and 22% since 2020 alone. Okay, that's not just a fluke. It's not we just got unlucky. I mean, guys, that's a pattern, right? This is literally the trajectory. Is they are making your money literally worth less. Think about that. When you go to the gas pump, when you go to the grocery store, when you do anything, and you see those prices go up, understand that is a result of policy, right? I mean, the chicken that laid the egg didn't just suddenly get a gold butt and the price of those eggs went up, right? That's inflation. That's just the way things work. And it's a choice that they're making. Okay. Well, right here, when Washington spends past what it collects, it prints the difference, right? If you or I did that, they would throw us under the jail, right? Oh, I'm sorry, I can't do it. Here, let me just print you some money, to the credit card holder, But that's literally what they do. The money supply jumped about 40% from 15.45 trillion to 21.70 trillion between February 2020 and March 2022. Federal Reserve's balance sheet roughly doubled from 4.8 trillion to 8.8 trillion, right? I mean, this is the real. So you guys are going to get this report, and you're going to have every single last piece of ammo you need to address this situation, right? To address this, to have, I think, safety, trust in your minds that independence is the only way out. Look, buried in this report is the fact that there is a 20-year ticking time bomb on this very thing, right? Tick tock, tick tock. The clock is winding down. 20 years, tops, 20 years. Texas is going to be independent by design or by default. Do you want to do it the right way and exit out on top? Or do you want to wait for this whole thing to just absolutely implode and have to dig yourself up out of the ashes? That really is the question. So anyway, I've already talked about this part of it. I'm not going to get into it because I'm well over time. Here's all of, when people have, skeptics that want to wave this thing off. Here are the answers, right? So you'll have those available to you. Here's something that's kind of a cool that you guys need to know. And this gets into the thing I'm going to talk about, I think, last, which is the share of U.S. Social Security taxes that Texas pays in is approximately 8.7%. And the share of Social Security benefits that Texas draws out is 6.7%. Okay. So you've got a bunch of younger workers subsidizing the Social Security program with a significant chunk of that money going to fund retirees in other states. So, I mean, literally a Texas run program would begin in the black. That's just the reality of it. Which takes me to this last thing that I want to talk about. And I'm going to scroll down to this because it's just as important. And this is really and truly, I think, one of the most shocking things for me in doing this report. As we started releasing it, I started reading the drafts and going through the data myself, just looking at the whole thing. This is the thing that, like I said, that us doing this report, I think the thing that just jumped out at me the most. $100,000 plus in federal debt now rides on every young Texan just starting out, growing by day, run up in their name and without their vote. Okay. And you will see right here, Texas is a young nation. Its median age is 35.9, right, against 39.2 for the entire United States. Only 13.9% of Texans are over 65 against 18% across the U.S. So what's happening with the young, and guys, I want you to listen to me. If you are, like I said, 36 or younger, or people that are 36 or younger, you're going to want them to see this report, or at least this snippet where I talk about it, because this is about them. Right. So I've got kids in that age range. I've got grandchildren. Right. So this is the important part for them, because after all, they will get to experience more of independence than we will. But it also means that they have longer to pay the piper if we let this thing implode on them. Right. So here it is. That young workforce is doing two jobs for Washington at the same time. Number one, it's bankrolling older states' retirements. And I covered that just a moment ago. So there's about a net $12 to $13 billion a year leaving Texas to fund retirements somewhere else. And so across 2019 and 2024, that's $75 billion that was shipped out from the young workforce to an aging retired workforce. right? It's never going to get repaid. And it's inheriting the bill for everything else. The $3.2 trillion debt share is growing about $150 billion a year in their name. And, you know, if the interest is at $72.80 billion a year, it doesn't buy them anything, right? The inflation that quietly took $150 billion in a single bad year. It's just the reality. So, you know, those seem like massive figures, and some people will say, well, you need to reduce that down to something that they understand. Okay, so understand this. You want to understand part of the reason that there's a massive housing crisis among the young right now? You know, why young families can't buy homes? It's not for a lack of homes, and people will say, well, it's the property taxes, this and that. It's really all of these things. But understand, if that money were staying here in Texas and in the pockets of the people that are earning it, instead of being shipped off to Washington, D.C. to pay for other retirees in their Ponzi scheme, or to be parceled out on a debt that they never signed on for, or to be distributed to a state that can't take care of its own business. Imagine if it stayed in your pocket. Imagine what you could do with it. Maybe you could afford to buy a house and not have to go rent an apartment, you know, at the price of what a mortgage used to cost, right? I mean, these are the kinds of impacts. The fact that, you know, it's not like a lot of people in their early 20s and early to mid to late 20s, they're not in their ultimate dream job. They're not at the top of their career. Many of them, because of inflation, are scraping by. They're living pillar to post, right? Hand to mouth. And that's not just blue collar jobs, that's white collar jobs too. And understand that that money that's being taken out for Social Security and all these other things, that you likely will never see that with 2031, 2030, 2031, 2032, Social Security going, you know, the fact is there's not enough to pay out what they're trying to pay out. And so that means that your money that was supposed to go into your retirement, that they're taking out right now under the guise of that, will likely be money you never see again. Well, what if you put that toward buying a house? What if you had the ability to do that? Well, I'm going to tell you, under the federal system, you cannot do that. But under a self-governing independent nation of Texas, you will absolutely be able to do that because your money will stay here. This message should resonate with everyone, every demographic, every generation. But this is, in particular, my message to the young. You are the ones that are going to benefit the most by Texas becoming a self-governing independent nation. And financially speaking, this 100% shows that to be the case. So the reality, folks, is that staying is the expensive option. And I think, without me just driving home and being uber repetitive on this, I think you can understand why. But that's the report, folks. That is, you know, when I read the final of this report, I was naturally excited because, yay, I got to check something that was, 11 years old off of my list. Rare you get a chance to do that. I mean, unless it's a bucket list, people do that kind of stuff, right? But this was not a bucket list item. It was just on the to-do list, okay? So I was excited, but I will tell you, I was stunned and staggered to see it all kind of right there. I mean, not that it didn't tell me anything, it didn't introduce any new concepts to me, okay? What it did do was it provided the data and the analysis necessary for me to understand what we already knew, right? To reinforce our position, to pour more gas on a fire that says we have to go. We have to go. We can't stay, right? I mean, this is the reality. When I say it's a ticking time bomb, I mean, it is, right? And that's, again, not me saying, this is literally bringing in the words of their own people. Insolvent. I mean, they literally have said it about themselves time and time again. I mean, you got the Pentagon's never passed an audit. I mean, that's in the report too. It talks about that. But between the debt and inflation and the brokenness of the Ponzi schemes that they have set up. I mean, Bernie Madoff went to jail over this kind of stuff, right? And here we are, we're trying to push Texas and Texans to become self-governing and independent. And for some reason, there are people out there that would see that as abnormal. But understand that those same people that would see what we're doing as abnormal think that what I just shared with you is totally cool. Oh, that's fine. It's no big deal. I mean, they think that that's sane and rational. And there's nothing sane and rational about it at all. It's not like, we're debating philosophy here. This is literally their own books, their own figures. So we know that they lie about us, right? They lie about the financial relationship, and now you know why they lie. Because if they told the truth, we'd be out of here like that. I mean, it'd already been done, right? And then when you find out that they literally have already admitted all of these things are true, but then did everything they could do starting in 2012 to start covering this up like a cat covering its crap on a concrete floor, well, suddenly things make sense. They know that this thing's headed for an ozer. They know it, and they know we're headed for the door. And they're just trying to squeeze the last bit of juice out of us that they can get, that they could possibly get before the end game. That's it. They're just trying to straight up squeeze the juice out of us. Every little drop. And the fact that they have accomplices, I mean, I used to call them apologists, but knowing what we see here, I don't know that we should call them apologists for the federal government. I think we should call them accomplices. I mean, this looks criminal to me, right? What they're doing to us, even if it's not criminal, it is immoral, it's unethical, and they're doing it to us every single solitary day. And the fact that they would really just kind of dump all this stuff off on, the under 35s, 35 and under, it's like, screw it. Let's just dump this on the kids. I mean, that is a classless move. I think they hate us. I really do. I really think they hate us because you don't do something like this to somebody that you supposedly love. So, that being said, folks, you can just imagine. You can just imagine. We didn't have a lot of questions come in tonight. I think probably the ones that I'm seeing, there's some that are going to be guys. I see them like, where do they borrow the money from? What happens if they don't pay it back? Some questions like, look, that stuff's all in the report. And I will. So be sure. So number one, be sure that you have registered support. You're basically on our email list. But more importantly, if you are not on the Texian app, be sure you get over there and get signed up, because I'm going to drop the link when we launch August 3rd, the night before. I'm going to drop the link to the landing page and to the report where you can get your hands on it. You guys will be the first to get your hands on it before we even send it out to the media. So be sure you're on the Texian app. And then, of course, we'll send out an email and all those things. But make sure you do that. Additionally, by the way, I mean, I've said this, but we've actually had people write in about this. If you would like to get your T&M gear, your Texit merch, anything like that, head over to TexianStore.com. It's TexianStore.com. I say it at the end of every single late night coffee talk, but be sure you do that. Additionally, look, if you need some news and views on Texas independence, head over to TexianPartisan.com, the only news outlet that writes from a Texian's perspective. Be sure you check that out. Be sure you sign up for the mailing list over there as well. And my friends, look, I know I went a little bit over, but it's a lot to cover. I mean, a lot. There was a lot more talk than coffee tonight, and that's on me. But look, if you have any questions, I imagine that there will be questions for next week's Coffee Talk that come out because of this. But go ahead and get them in early, right? Head over to Coffee Talk. Well, send an email to coffeetalk@vtnm.org. When this live is over, be sure to share it with your friends, with your family, with anyone and everyone you possibly can. We're going to have to get this report in the hands of as many people as possible. That's legislators, but that's also neighbors and friends and everybody you can, because it really tells the story. But friends, in the meantime, wow, I'm going to leave you with the words that I leave you with every time we're together. They're not my words. They're the words of Sam Houston. When he said that Texas will again lift its head and stand among the nations, I believe that time is now. And the question is, will you stand with her? Good night, everyone.